How are we doing, everybody? Welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today we're talking again about the transitional area, the start of the downswing. Really important part of the golf swing that most amateurs golfers get wrong, which is why I'm kind of taking my time, breaking it down, reiterating points, doing drills to make sure that you get it as best as you possibly can, because it transforms everything in your golf game. Right. Basically, the transition is the area between when you complete the top of the backswing and you start to initiate getting ready for the start of the downswing. I've talked very much recently on the channel about the importance of two things in the backswing. One, creating an internal hip rotation, and two, putting pressure underneath that trail leg. Because without doing those, then you're never going to transition as well as you possibly can. And today's video will just shed another little bit of light on that in terms of what's going to happen. Now, the exercise that you need to do today, you can use something at home like the wall if you like. I would use a free moving object that has a little bit of give in it, because if you started to practice against the wall and you turn onto the wall, it's going to push you away. So something like a chair is good, but again, you want it around about hip height, hence the reason why my bar is here today. Now, you take your posture, you create a bend of the hip. The idea would be that you'd be roughly a fingertips distance away from whatever object it is that you end up using. The idea in the backswing is that as you trigger a rotation, this right hip here will find the bar. Okay? Now, what should happen, and this is how you would start the downswing, is that basically as we start to initiate the downswing, basically my other side of my hip now needs to join the bar. Okay? So basically the pelvis is going to be rotating in between the legs, and we are trying to get the pelvis back to a state of being square in the downswing, which is technically known as a separation. It's an important part. You watch loads of different golfers on the TV and we'll see that they move differently in terms of they swing on different planes. They have different functionalities of the wrists. But as I've already talked about on the channel, those things don't necessarily matter as long as you understand what best suits you. One of the musts in the golf swing is that you have to try and move towards capacity, because your rotation is your axis of rotation as one. Two, it's balance. Three, it's power. You know, it dictates what swing plane you'd be swinging on, which therefore dictates how you're going to function with your wrists. And if you're off balance and you don't rotate very well, then you're never going to get that much consistency. Plus, let's not even talk about using the longer clubs like the driver and stuff, right? So this is really important to understand and what to do. Now, the idea is that, again, if this is whatever object at home, you would get yourself in posture and you would turn, okay? As I've talked about before, and I'll reiterate again, the idea is that you're trying to resist the amount of rotation on the upper part of your leg. And that doesn't mean you're trying to resist the amount of rotation of it at all. I would turn my pelvis, pointing now, as you can see, about 45-50 degrees in this sort of direction, okay? Which basically means the upper part of my leg is going to be pointing slightly outward as well, right? What you don't want to do in the golf swing is you don't want to turn everything at the same rate of rotation, because one, you can see then you become vulnerable of doing this drifting, and two, you don't activate the correct muscles at the top of the hip area. Once you do that, you also have to find a way in the backswing of putting pressure underneath that trail side, which is why I still think that the wedge exercise that I recently put on the channel is something that every golfer should do. It'll help you activate this, and it'll help you find a way to put pressure into the floor, which is what we find professional golfers do through the force plate machines and all the sort of the data that comes off that. Now, the reason why they put pressure in towards the ground is, yes, because you want to use the ground to store energy, but the other reason why you want to put pressure in towards the ground is because as I turn back, you can see the way my hip finds the bar. Well, as long as there's pressure underneath that trail side, and the pressure stays in this side as I start to initiate my downswing, I can now pull, if you like, my pelvis back to square without this one coming forward. And this is the problem that kind of plagues a lot of golfers, is that if you don't find a way to put pressure underneath this side and you start to pull this one back, then this one will come forward, which is why you need to find a way to put pressure under the leg. So then by the time you get back to the transition, you can get the pelvis back to a point of being square. Now, that's what you would basically do at home, right? Whatever object it is, you would turn up towards the top, you would keep your upper body there, you can put your hands across your shoulders if you wish, and then as you start to initiate the downswing, you're trying to resist your upper body rotation, and you're trying to find a way to get that left-hand side of your pelvis, or if you like the pelvis itself, back to square on the bar. So if you like, both hips, both bum cheeks are back on the bar. That's your transitional area. Now, That'll help, right? A lot of golfers, hopefully. But, you know, if you don't have access to that, or that's something you don't want to do and you video your golf swing, then something else that you could look to do is from a face-on perspective. If I mirror image exactly the same movement that I've just done from here, I would swing up towards the top, and like I said to you, my pelvis would be pointing now towards my bar, and the upper part of my leg is at a lesser degree of rotation, but you can still see the way it's pointing out. Now, if I put pressure underneath that leg, and then I start to pull this one back to create an opening, by the time my pelvis is now square again towards my intended target, you can see the way for a very short space in time, both legs would be outward facing relative to you. Okay? And that is a really important thing. And this is where we get terms like the squat move and all the rest of it. Okay? If you turn up to the top and you don't load and you pull this one back, you can see the way this would come spinning across back in this direction. So not only would it kind of cause you to do this, which would be, I suppose, an over the top sort of move, but it also kind of amplifies the problem as to why you need to load in the backswing position. So how we start the downswing is pivotally evolved around how good you demonstrate the backswing. Okay? You turn, you put pressure under the leg. How you technically start the downswing is that whilst there is still pressure underneath this leg, you would start to open up your hips. And the point that we're trying to look at today would be roughly by the time you are left arm horizontal coming down, and it would be different for every golfer, yes, depending on how much leverage you can create at the top of the backswing, both of these would be outward facing. Pelvis would be back to square to target. From there you carry on working, eventually you lift up, and obviously we'll keep talking about what else you would do. It's a really important thing that you understand this, and whether you're going to use some sort of object at home and you find it's easier from the side-on perspective to get your hip back on it and get the other hip to join it, or whether you feel from a face-on perspective it's easier for you to see what you're trying to do in terms of both of the upper part of the leg would be outward facing, it's up to you. It's essentially the same thing, but the important thing that we're trying to understand is that you pressure load the leg in the backswing position. So you put pressure into the leg, so it basically stops it from moving as you pull the pelvis back in the transitional area. Yes, you would have to pull this back without weight being on it. And yes, we're talking about something that's happening very quickly. So of course, at some point, the weight is going to be re-established back in towards this side. But to get rid of the early hip extension, the sliding motion, the spinning motion, you basically need to understand you put pressure into the leg, you open up the pelvis in that transitional area, and that is how you're going to initiate the downswing. So hopefully we start to get that. What happens, and this is what I'm going to talk about in the future, as to how much of a separation you can create does make a difference. I'm going to talk about that very soon on the channel coming up next week. But the important thing is that everybody, or the majority of people out there, will be able to create a degree of separation, which is very important because it will stop you coming over the top and having the other problems that I mentioned earlier. Got to go and work on that little You've got to go and work on that little transitional area. Yes, I know it's very difficult, and it's something that you would have to do at home and break down. Over time, when you see it and when you watch professional golfers, it'll look like one fluid motion like this, you know, and then all of a sudden it won't seem. But this is like learning how to dance. You know, you have to break the parts down, you have to break the steps up, you have to do them slowly and methodically, and then over time you'll be able to put them together at full speed, and you'll start to have a golf swing which is just fantastic. That's how you start the downswing. Pressure load, get the pelvis rotating, get the pelvis back to square in that transitional area whilst there is no weight on it. That is the key thing to starting the downswing, and it's a really important thing that you guys understand and do your best at trying to introduce into your game. Hopefully you enjoy the video. Right, as always, appreciate a thumbs up, and remember it's absolutely free to press that subscribe button. If you're going to press the subscribe button, then you might as well press the little bell icon, because that means you receive notifications every time a new video comes out, which at the moment is pretty much on a daily basis. It's also free to send swings into the channel. The social media links as to where you would send your swings are in the description box below. Send them in, I'll annotate over them, I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Go and work on it, do the bar, understand from the face-on perspective, it will make the world of difference. You'll be able to do it, you just need time to do it, and I'll catch up with you guys again soon.